Welcome to From the Carmel. This is Moriah. I'm your host, Ethan Kushner, chair of Moriah Congregation in Haifa. One of the guilty pleasures I have in hosting this podcast is the ability to talk to interesting people who had a chance to shape the future of Moriah. And the guest on our show today is certainly at the top 5 of people that I really wanted to talk to. Don't laugh. Naomi Feigin was born in Melbourne in 1952. She was educated at Moriah College, no connection, in Garden Vale, Central High School, and McRobertson Girls High School. Upon completion of her matriculation, that was something that we did back in the day, Naomi spent a year as Shnat Hachshara here with Habonim. In 1973, she married Paul, and then she got a diploma of teaching from the Canberra College of Advanced Education. In 76, Naomi and Paul came on Aliyah to Haifa, and Naomi taught English to gifted children and upgraded her diploma to a Bachelor's of Art degree at Haifa University. When did you have time to do that and have children? She later went on to do a Master's in Social Work and a graduate diploma in psychotherapy from the psychology department, at the University of Haifa. And then she became the co-director of the Haifa Shelter for Battered Women from 1985 until 1991. As a social worker and psychotherapist, she has worked in the child development units at Bnei Zion Hospital, one of the main hospitals here in Haifa, and the Maccabi Health System. She was responsible for social work services and child development centers at Maccabi for Northern Israel. And believe it or not, she retired from Maccabi in 2016. Since 2018, she has been volunteering with African asylum seekers here in Haifa, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about that as well. So Naomi, welcome to our program. I really been looking forward on my calendar for this opportunity. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
So let's first of all, it's a pleasure to speak to someone with an accent from down under. Having spoken to South Americans and Americans and Brits, so we're trying to be as egalitarian as possible on this show. So, as I mentioned in the opening, you grew up in Australia. So tell us about your early days, your early years of growing up in the 1950s in Australia.
I was the first generation of immigrants to Australia. My parents were German-born, escaped Germany in 1939 separately to London, met there in Habonim, and came to Australia after the war, and married, and had me and my sister. So my father had been on the Kindertransport out of Germany. My mother had gone at the age of 11 with her parents to London just before the outbreak. And the reason they got to Australia was because when the war ended, my father found that his sister had gotten to Australia. She had left a couple of months before him, and she said, "We have no one left, come." So he went from London to Melbourne, and his girlfriend, my mother, joined him. They married, and the rest is history. So that's my parents' story.
Yeah, so go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say that in Germany, my mother's family was part of the liberal movement, the Reform Jewish movement in Berlin. So in Australia, and my father had been brought up Orthodox. So when they got to Australia, my mother was very keen to join Temple Beth Israel, the Reform synagogue, which I grew up in. And it wasn't until my parents divorced when I was 18 that my father went back to Orthodox Judaism and joined my sister in the Orthodox shul. So yes, so that's my synagogue history.
That's your synagogue history, and
yeah.
I have to admit that Melbourne is one of my favorite cities in the world. How was it growing up in Australia back in those days?
It was actually very nice. There was a small, not so small, there was a close-knit Jewish community of German, Polish, Hungarian, and Romanian Jews. who's, settled in certain neighborhoods. There was the Maccabi Sports Club. There were lots of synagogues. There was B'nai B'rith. There was a yeshiva. There was a nice kind of Jewish environment in which to grow up. Um, we we Paul, my husband Paul, and I got very good educations at the public high school. I only went to a Jewish school in elementary school. Afterwards, I went to the regular school, and we got a good education there. And because it was they were academic high schools, there were a lot of Jewish kids in our high schools, all very high achievers. Today, the high achievers are Chinese, I think. But in those days, it was the Jewish kids, and my childhood was very much focused on Habonim, the Zionist movement. There was Habonim, there was Hashomer Hatzair, there was Beitar, there was Bnei Akiva. We had the whole gamut. And because my parents had met in Habonim in London, they sent me to Habonim in Melbourne.
I was going to
And
ask how you made that connection. So, was it a Zionist household that you grew up in?
very much so. My mother was also a social worker. And I actually have a daughter who's a social worker. We're 3 generations of social workers. And one of my strongest memories is in 1967, after the Six-Day War, my mother going to Jerusalem to the first Jewish social workers conference in Israel.
Interesting.
And she came back and she was just absolutely enamored with Israel. My parents were supposed to make Aliyah from London, being in Habonim there. And their friends, I think from the movement in London, settled in Neot Mordechai, in the Galil. And but my parents didn't. They went to Australia. So the Zionism was there.
And you came here, as we mentioned in the opening, you came here on a Shnat Achshara, on a year
Program.
What we in America call here now a gap year between high school
Right.
and university.
Right.
What kind of an Israel did you find when you came here from Australia?
Well, first of all, we spent the year on kibbutz. We were a big group of Australians from all over Australia and South Africans, and we were on kibbutz Kfar Hanassi, and we had a wonderful year. I immediately fell in love with the kibbutz. I loved working on the kibbutz, meeting the kibbutznikim, listening to their stories. I was absolutely enamored with the kibbutz, and we traveled all over the country. We spent, I think, at least a month, if not more, in Jerusalem. I remember going with kibbutznikim from Kfar Hanassi who were on Shnat Shirut in Beit Sha'an and spending 2 weeks with them in their komuna and thinking that was the greatest thing on earth. I was very, very gung-ho and happy. I loved the year. And when I came back to Australia, I was adamant that I was going to make Aliyah.
That was going to be my next question. And then you were dating your now husband, Paul, or did he have the same aspirations?
He did not. We met when we were 15 and 16 on the tram to school. And I left for a year, and when I came back, he wanted to go to Canberra to do his PhD, and we decided to get married. And I said, I will marry you, but I want to live in Israel. And he said, I will come and live in Israel, but I won't live on kibbutz. And so,
So Haifa was the compromise? Was that it?
that was the compromise. Well, Paul immediately after his doctorate, he got a job at the Technion. So
Okay.
Haifa was the place where we settled. Yeah.
What kind of city did you find when you came here in the mid 70s?
How did I find Haifa?
How did you find Israel, and how did you find Haifa differently now as a married woman, not as a volunteer coming on a 1-year program?
Right. It's never easy. I always say you should make Aliyah when you're young, because there are lots of challenges. I arrived pregnant with Dana, who is going to be 50 next month, and so that screwed up a little pun for me because I gave birth, so it affected my Hebrew learning. I had to learn Hebrew differently and later, while Paul learned Hebrew at the Technion. But because I had gone to a Jewish school until the 6th grade, I knew how to read and write. And that was very, very beneficial for me. I mean, I could read signs, I could read street signs, I could get around. We lived in Neve Sha'anan, just outside the Technion gate. And I think there were two things that helped us with our klita. How do you say klita in English?
Absorption.
With our absorption, sorry. One was
Mm-hmm.
Paul's colleagues at the Technion who, adopted this idealistic young couple who'd just arrived and advised us, helped us, invited us, and looked after us. And the second was the neighborhood. The minute the kids went to gun, I made friends with the parents of the children the girls were in gun with.
Mm-hmm.
And we slowly became Israelis. We went back to Australia every July, August to
For
be
the
with
winter.
the family for the winter. Paul's parents generally sent us tickets. And the truth is that after, when we went on our first sabbatical to Berkeley, after 6 years in Israel, and had a fabulous, fabulous, fabulous year in Berkeley, I came home very unhappy and said to Paul, I will never be able to speak Hebrew like an Israeli. I'll never be able to read a novel in Hebrew. I'll never get my dream job. This is not working. I want to go back to Australia. And he said to me, we were standing in the kitchen in our apartment. I can see it like yesterday. He said, you dragged me here. We're staying. And then Shelley was born, and the rest is history. And we've been happy ever since.
I think that, excuse me, I think that there are many a couple that immigrated or made Aliyah to Israel that have had similar conversations. I can attest for myself. Why did you come here? Why did we come here? Etc. But I think that the bug is larger than all of us once we get here. Naomi, when did you and Paul find Moriah, and what attracted you to this community when you first came through its doors?
Okay, we didn't join Moriah until our second daughter Tali's bat mitzvah. When we first arrived in Israel, we didn't think we needed a synagogue. We were like, we're Israelis now, We
Yeah.
don't have to be reminded when is Rosh Hashanah and when is Tu B'Shvat. It's part of the system. We don't need a synagogue. But over the years, going to the Technion synagogue for Yom Kippur was too awful, and I missed it. I missed it a lot. And when we moved to Achuza, there was just no doubt about it. We were going to join Moriah. We lived very close by. We knew the Carneys, Carney, what was his first name? Reuven Carney.
Reuven Kalani, one of the
Yes,
early trendsetters of the congregation.
right. So he was a colleague of Paul's at the Technion, and he very much encouraged us to come to Moriah. And it was like a hand fitting into a glove. We used to be Friday nighters. We used to come on Friday night. Tali had her bat mitzvah. And I think we've really been active ever since we joined way back then.
What kind of congregation did you find? You mentioned that you grew up in a somewhere on the spectrum between Reform and Orthodoxy, but what were you expecting when you first came through the doors of Moriah, and what kind of community did you find when you got there?
Okay, so we went to the liberal Reform synagogue in Melbourne. That's where I had my bat mitzvah, and that's what I
Hmm.
knew. Walking into Moriah was lovely because men and women sat together. And the reason that I felt very much at home with the prayers was because I had gone to an Orthodox day school from second grade to sixth grade. So I knew how to pray and I knew how to sing, and everything was familiar. So I had no trouble because that had been my childhood. I had prayed the Orthodox way in
So,
as a child at school, so it was very familiar.
and in those days, was it mainly an Olim type of congregation, or was it already a mix of Israelis and immigrants from
It
North
was
America, Europe,
it was
etc.?
pretty much an Olim synagogue, um, with Olim from all over the world, South America, Switzerland, Italy, all over. And I loved that. I mean, it certainly wasn't just Americans. It wasn't just Anglo-Saxon.
Sure.
It was European, and there were Israelis too. And the people were lovely, and they were all ages. And when we joined, we found a group of friends who had kids our age, and they became like family. We would spend Chagim together in each other's homes. We were active in the services. I used to sing Shira Shirim on Friday nights because that's all a woman could do. Um, and it felt like home. It was nice.
Okay, so beautiful segue to our next topic, so to speak. Um, you mentioned obviously that you grew up in a Reform synagogue in Australia, and there women have a far greater role. They're even back then. I'm assuming that they were far more integrated into the communal life, the religious life. And you just mentioned that when you came to Moriah, you participated. That your only avenue of participation as a woman was the fact that you could sing Shir Shirim, the Song of Psalms, on Friday nights.
And I
What
could prepare kiddush,
and you could prepare kiddush. Oh,
which no man ever did, unlike today.
well, unlike today, we
Yeah.
won't mention who, but inside joke here. But so how did that make you feel?
I didn't like it at all. And I was always a feminist, and I didn't like it. I really didn't like it. But
So
it was just the way things were. But from when I joined, I think, we talked. It was spoken about, and I certainly was verbal about about it, especially when certain conservative synagogues in Israel started becoming egalitarian. I think Omer was the first, and it was, I think, Beersheba was soon after. So it was being spoken about. It was being, it perhaps wasn't not in our, there was nothing in our synagogue, but it was around in conservative Judaism, and it was a topic of conversation.
My female dog is agreeing with every word they're saying, and we're not going to stop the recording for her voicing her discontent about women not taking full part in communal life in synagogues in Israel. So you come into you come into Moriah. You, as you say, women's roles are very minor, so to speak, major but minor. How you, as you say, as a feminist woman, how do you go about trying to create this change within the mindset of the congregation that, like any synagogue, it doesn't make a difference, Reform, conservative, Orthodox, very set in their ways in the end. So how do you go about making that change? It's intriguing for me to think, to talk to you about this thought process of yours and how you can create that.
Look, it certainly wasn't my battle. I was the first female Yoshevet Rosh, but that was after we had had that very famous Assefa Klalit to become an egalitarian. Before that, it was something that was just being spoken about because it was happening in other congregations. So it was the VUD's job
The board,
to
right?
the board. It was the board's job to look into it, to talk about it, to discuss it, to see what we were going to do as a congregation, because other congregations in the country were doing it and had done it. So that's sort of the way it worked.
So an interesting question then to ask you, Naomi, did you feel, as someone who wanted to make this change happen, I assume you wanted to make it happen quicker rather than slower. Did you feel that the board of the synagogue at the time was dragging its feet because it didn't want to take such a decision? Or how
No.
long did this process that we're talking about actually take place?
Okay. So um, I think the board was open. There's always fear. People don't like change. You don't want to lose you don't want everybody to leave you. It causes anxiety. So Gil became our rabbi in, I think,
Gil Nativ, Rabbi Gil
Gil
Nativ, who we
Nativ.
had on our
Yes.
show several weeks ago.
So I think he came in around October 92. And it was something that we were also discussing with him and which he was in favor of. And Jonathan then was the president.
Jonathan
And
Friedland.
Jonathan Friedland. And the feeling was that this was not something that could be decided by a board, that it had to be decided by the community. And the idea was that we would have a meeting and we would invite everybody in the congregation. Any paid member could come along. Anybody, everybody, and anybody could say what they wanted to say, whether they were for or against and why. And at the end of this very long meeting, we would vote. And that was the decision that was taken. And it was very fraught, very fraught.
I can imagine.
There was somebody who came and paid his membership the morning of the Asifah so that he could come and vote against, because he had had his bar mitzvah at Moriah and he didn't want it to change. There was somebody else exactly the opposite who came and said, I will join if you become egalitarian. There was the meeting was like electricity. And everybody spoke. Everybody spoke. And there were a few, there were all sorts of arguments. We'll be like the Reform. If we don't, we're like the Orthodox. I've grown up in this synagogue. I don't want it to change. If it doesn't change, I'm leaving. It was a very electrifying evening. It went on for hours and hours and hours and hours. And in the end, we voted for change.
How close was that vote? I'm just curious.
I don't remember. I think it was about 2/3 that
Really?
wanted
Okay.
change. I think it was about 2/3, or even more. And there were people who were very upset about it because somebody said, this guy brought his teenage kids to vote. That's not fair. Each family shouldn't have more than 2 votes. There were it was what we call in Hebrew ta'un. How do you say that in English?
Charged. It was a very charged meeting.
It was a very charged meeting, but the promise was that everything would be done thoughtfully. Everything would be done gradually, very gradually. It wasn't as though there would be, everything would change overnight. We would start with small things and gradually, as people got used to them, we would become more and more egalitarian. And that took 10 years.
So this process that started in the 1990s took until the millennium to fully be integrated. That's
yes,
amazing. Okay.
So let me tell you. I don't remember the exact details, but I do remember. First of all, after the vote, about 4 families left, and they were veteran families. We loved them, and it was very upsetting. They just couldn't come to terms with it, so that was difficult. And being sensitive to people's needs. I'm a social worker. It was very, very important. So I was fine with gradual, as was everybody else. So I think a few weeks after that meeting, Gil Nativ's wife, Ziva, opened a class to teach women Ta'amei HaMikra.
How to read
so
trope.
that we could read trope from the Torah. And we were a big group of women. Just for those who know, Sharona Meital and Meira Frank and Sharon Berg. And we were a big group of women. And we started reading from the Torah. And that was lovely. We had nice voices. And that was stage 1. I think at that time also, for a bat mitzvah, girls did that bat mitzvah singing Shira Shirim on Friday night.
Yes.
And very quickly, girls could have their bat mitzvah on a Shabbat, and they could read the Haftarah, only the Haftarah, not
read from the Torah.
I don't think so. I think girls began with the Haftarah. So it was only later, quite a bit later, that they could be shlichot tzibur, quite a bit later that they could get aliyot to the Torah, and say Kaddish.
For their loved
stand
ones?
up and say Kaddish for their loved ones. And what was the last thing that took 10 years? It was being counted in the minyan.
Really? I thought that would have been the first thing.
No. And I think there was this crazy argument that if women are counted in the minyan, men will stop coming.
Okay, that's that's an interesting thing that you're saying, because as somewhat of a kind of an unofficial historian of Moriah, I remember at least the words of some of the founders who said that one of the reasons why that the women back in the 50s, they were counted, but they didn't participate in the service. So I have to check this, because this is amazing how this reversal happened and why. But
And
but
and in the in the beginning, if I was reminded, women couldn't be counted in the minyan. They could only if there were 9 men and 1 woman, then the woman would be counted.
what would happen if she was in the kitchen at the time? Was she
Don't know. So that was the last. That was the last thing.
okay? So
So
go ahead.
yeah, no, that I think I've said everything.
I think it's an incredible story. It's an incredible journey, and it's amazing how, in the women's rights movement in the 1960s, that the conservative had already established women's rights and whatnot, but in the 70s, but the conservative movement, also in the United States, I'm sure also in Australia, took its time to integrate women fully into the mix, which today I think would be unheard of and unimaginable, even to think that this is taking place. This literally, what you're describing, is a process that ended around the time when I came back from the United States and I joined Moriah in 1999. So, and now, as we're talking, Naomi, I'm trying to rack my brain to remember if I felt that the congregation back in those days was anything else but egalitarian. And it's amazing, because I felt that it was egalitarian from the day I walked in.
There were, back when we joined the synagogue, there was a VAD, there was a board,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a women's committee. And the women's committee was in charge of Kiddush, and it was in charge of parties and celebrating things, and that was only women. I mean, it was a very, very sexist. It was very, very sexist, and it was led by pretty much elderly men who I won't mention.
Let's not mention names, right?
Who were extremely against.
I don't think they're with us anymore, but we shouldn't mention names.
They're not with us anymore.
Maybe their children may be with us, but
they were horrified. They didn't want things to change, and that's how bad it was. I was asked if I wanted to be on the women's committee. If I wanted, it was awful. So that was back then. What was nice was we had some people who left after that asifa and later came back and became very active. So, change takes a long time, and I suppose they were very upset with it, but once they got their head around it, they actually came back. So we lost people, we gained people, and we lost people, but they came back.
So let's jump forward now 25, 26 years from those days and bring us to today. If I take 3 junctions of your participation, your life and Paul's life in Kilat Moriah, how different, I think the answer is pretty much self-evident, but how different of a congregation do you find Moriah to be today than the one you joined? And is it today the Kehillah, the congregation that you envisioned when you were spearheading this move, this radical, sorry to say the word radical, but in those days, radical move towards egalitarianism?
Okay, so when we during the 90s, when we were in this process of becoming egalitarian, we were a community of families with, as I said, with children, and So we had toddlers running around. We came to lots of bar and bat mitzvahs of all our friends' children. Um, and 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 we were the young people. I mean, there were elderly people who are no longer with us. The you know,
Hmm.
the respected
Elders, right?
elders of the community, and we brought in
A fresh,
life,
a fresh vibe.
fresh vibe, and once women got equality, we were participating a whole lot more. Men, women, together, apart. We were very, very active.
But you say that there
Um,
was one place that the men did not cross into, and that was the kitchen.
that was the kitchen, right?
I wonder who
Maybe
made that change.
maybe I'm wrong. Maybe very, very occasionally, but
Okay.
women stayed in the kitchen because Rivka Yaron ran it, and I think she wanted women anyway. That's how it was.
Yeah.
Now today's Moriah, I'm a has-been. I'm an oldie. My kids have
I
grown
would
up.
not call you a has been.
Okay, but
So okay.
our kids have grown up,
Hmm.
and they don't live in Haifa. Our grandchildren had bar and bat mitzvah in Moriah, and that made us
True.
extremely happy. But one of my pleasures of coming to Moriah is seeing the next generation that's taken over from us,
Hmm.
and who's running the show now, and that's wonderful. I mean, that's how it should be. Le Dor Vador.
That's a great way to go to the next segment, Nomi, within the time that we have left. And you say, I mean, there's something in your DNA that is definitely an activist. And today you are working on an amazing project, and that is working, as I mentioned earlier, with is it asylum seekers, or is it workers who come from Africa to live in Israel?
It's asylum seekers who ran away from Eritrea and Sudan because they were being persecuted, and after a long journey, crossed the border into Israel between 2008 and 2012, before a wall was built so that they could no longer enter. And they haven't been given no status in Israel. Um, they're not Jewish. They're black. Israel really doesn't want them. And so they don't have status here, and they live in poverty and um, doing very simple jobs. Their children who are born here have no status. And it upsets me because my parents were refugees, and I believe that we need to be good to refugees. There aren't that many of them. It's not as though they're going to take over the place. They do all the jobs that nobody else wants to do. And
How many people? How many people are we talking about in general in
in the
Israel and
whole
maybe
of
in
in the
Haifa?
whole of in whole, the whole of Israel, there are 17,000 at the
Really?
moment, I think. And in Haifa, there were about seven to 800. Um, and I joined an organization, a grassroots organization that has been trying to help them. We've been teaching them Hebrew and English, giving the kids help with their studies, a homework club. We made them a summer camp. We've been trying to help. The organization has actually closed down due to lack of funding. The Most of our money came from America, and the American government no longer will support any refugee activities anywhere in the world.
Right.
And then came the war, and money going to hostages and to displaced persons. So we're no longer an organization, but because I know them all personally, they still call, and I still help where I can with helping them with
With
at
whatever they
school,
need.
at kindergarten, with kupat
Hmm.
cholim, with whatever they need. So yeah,
Right.
that's what I've been doing.
Incredible work, Naomi. And I, after this very um, somber type of, I don't want to end on a somber note,
Yeah.
which is what you kind of described with your work with the African asylum seekers. Where, what is your wish for Moriah? If we had a time capsule and you put a wish in for someone to open it up and say 50, 75 years from now, what would you want to write for
You
those
know,
people to read?
I'm not sure, but I think we talked about change and all this change that came in the 90s, becoming egalitarian. And I actually think that Moriah has to change again. Um, People may not like it, but I don't think we should be using the Siddur that we're using. I would like to see our prayers changing. I would like. Um, I think to keep young people involved and active, families engaged. I think then I'm not going to be the one who's doing it, but I think that the doers and shakers have to rethink and change again so that when you open the time capsule, there will still be a Moriah synagogue. And I don't think it will be today's Moriah. I think it will be a different Moriah.
I hope so. I certainly hope so, that it will be a different Moriah. The same way today's Moriah is definitely different than the Moriah that you came to in the
Right.
1970s, and you instituted and you made the necessary changes in the 90s. One last question. Here we are. I'm speaking American, you're speaking Aussie, and do you think that from now, from having this perspective of 40 years or so more, um, do you feel that the conservative movement, the Masorti movement in Israel, has made any inroads with the general Israeli Sabra society? Because you also mentioned that when you came to Moriah, it was pretty much an immigrant
Right.
community. And today, I think that some people also, quote unquote, accuse us of also still being an immigrant community.
Look, I think that secular Israelis, as much as they love Moriah for their son or daughter's bar or bat mitzvah, find it difficult to feel to want to come regularly and pray every week. It's not in their DNA because they didn't grow up with it the way you and I did.
Right.
But we do have, I think, more Israelis now. And we have a few bar mitzvah families who stay
Who
and
stuck?
who have
Hmm.
stuck
Hmm.
because they saw when they were coming every week what a special community and congregation we are, and that I think is very positive. And that is what is going to be our future, I hope. And that's why I think we have to modify again, because we have to attract and keep Israelis again without
Engaged.
losing
Right.
engaged,
Hmm.
without losing what's important. When we
Right.
became egalitarian, we didn't lose what was important. And making more changes now to suit society in 2026, I don't think we'll lose anything either. What makes Moriah is the atmosphere, the caring, the camaraderie, the everybody helping, just a real feeling of community. That is our biggest strength.
I couldn't ask for a better closing sentence than what you just delivered, Naomi. An amazing. When we started this, I told you this show was going to be about 40 minutes. Guess what? We're already almost at 46. So this is what happens when two people are having fun and talking to each other. So Naomi, first of all, I want to thank you for joining us on this podcast. I'd like to thank you for everything that you and Paul and your daughters have done for Moriah, because I think that you took the charge when someone needed to take the leadership role and to really make this change happen. I'm sure that the change would have happened. I'm not sure that it would have happened exactly at the moment that you and the other women in our congregation back in the 1990s really put it together. You had also a very supportive rabbi and the rabbi's wife in Gil Nativ and Ziva. So again, I want to thank you for not only for everything that you and Paul have done for Moriah, but also for your work as a social activist in Israel in general, and also in the city of Haifa. And at this point, I'd like to also thank all of you for tuning in and watching us, whether you watched us on YouTube or listened to us on Spotify, as what Naomi does. She didn't know it was going to be videoed. So now she has to watch us on YouTube. So I'd like to say again, thank you for tuning in, watching us. I'd like to say also that this program was produced by Nicole Cutler. The sound effects were that you heard before were from my dog Ruby, who likes to make a surprise appearance once in a while on these podcasts. And until next week, or until next program, I would say, there will be one more program before Rosh Hashanah, so it's not yet time for us to wish all of you a Shana Tova, a Happy New Year. So this has been From the Carmel. This is Moriah. And until next time, I'm your host, Ethan Kushner, chair of Moriah Congregation, wishing all of you a continued successful and joyous day.